Hey guys, thank you for coming to our presentation. I'm Brandon,
I'm Vincent.
I'm Lucas.
and we are the VR 3D modeling group.
So the reason why we started this project is because at the beginning of the quarter, my teammate Brandon was trying to print out a 3D box, but it was kind of hard to use Blender to create a 3D to do the 3D modeling because as you can see on the left, the user interface is very complicated. You have a lot of buttons and it is kind of hard to learn. Also, using a mouse and a keyboard to move the object and rotate, resize the object is kind of not intuitive. So we are thinking maybe we can use the VR software to do the 3D modeling because in the VR you can see things in the real world and you can grab on the object, so it's more intuitive. So in this VR 3D modeling software, we introduced some novelty into it. For example, we introduce grabbing the object so that the users can simply move the object or rotate the object in 6 degrees of freedom by simply grabbing it. We also introduced resizing with one hand. So as you can see on the right, there's a yellow sphere on the top of the cube. The user can simply pinch the yellow sphere and resize the cube by moving his or her finger. We also introduced intuitive color selection. So the users, as you can see in here, this picture, the user can simply touch the object they want to change the color with, and then they can simply touch the color pad to select the color. We also introduced some simple hand gestures to duplicate and delete the object. As you can see in this picture, the user can simply touch the bottom of the object to duplicate it. And we also make it to be a little bit far away from the original objects so that you can it's easier to see them.
Okay, so now I want to talk about the usability of our project, and to do this, I'm going to be going over a couple of the questions from our questionnaire. So on the bottom left, you can see a chart that we created, and it was about the question asking, how difficult would you rate your experience in using 3D modeling softwares like Blender, Fusion 360, and AutoCAD? And this question was asked to people who had previously selected that they have had prior experience in using these types of softwares. So as you can see, for people that have had this prior experience, they still rated using these 3D modeling softwares at a difficulty of 3.5 out of 5, in which 1 is least difficult and 5 is most difficult. So as you can see, even though these people have had experience, they still found it fairly difficult to use these types of softwares. The next one on the bottom right is kind of like an A/B testing thing that we did, and we asked the users which one, in your opinion, is easier to use, our VR modeling software or conventional 3D modeling softwares. And all 9 of the user surveys rated our system as easier to use than the conventional softwares. So next up, I want to talk about why people thought our software was easier to use than the more commonly used softwares. And on the left, you can see how people just thought it was more natural to use. So the top left one has it saying how it's very easy to grab and resize objects using our VR modeling software with very natural hand gestures for basically everything. And then the next one talks about how you're able to freely change and manipulate the position of your objects in our the VR 3D modeling software. And this is different than how it works in traditional modeling softwares like Blender, because in traditional softwares, you're only able to move in a single axis at a time, which is kind of difficult for doing free manipulation. The last one talks about how even though there are less features in our software than traditional softwares, the movement is still fairly intuitive, like with the exception of doing our deletion gesture, but this is something that we can of course change in future iterations of our software. Okay, so next up, I want to talk about how people thought that just using the physical interaction and interactability part of the VR system was just easier to use than conventional systems. And that's then that in our software, you're able to have immediate feedback when you place objects. So you're able to grab them and then drop them exactly where you want them to be, which is something you can see in real time. And then we also talked about how like physical interaction is easier and how it's more interactable. Our software is more interactable.
Okay, next, I want to briefly talk about what we did for the user study. So on the demo session on Wednesday, we actually recruit our classmate, and we also invite the professor and TA to join join our demo. So the first thing when we have the participant in our to try our system is to teach them how our system works. For example, like we teach them like if they want to duplicate the object, they have to use their right hand with the palm facing up to like touch the bottom of the object. And also if they want delete the object, they have to use the left hand with the palm facing to the left and actually touch the object, then it will delete it. And also the next step is we ask the participant to build their own object. They can reset the object, change the color of the object, or even duplicate and delete the object. So after couple trials, then we ask the participant to finish the questionnaire at the end to see how they're feeling about our system. So yeah, so now let's talk about what kind of questionnaire we're using. So in our questionnaire, we actually have two types of questions. One is the multiple choice, and another one is the free response. So for the multiple choice, we ask for example, we ask the participant to rate how difficulty it is when they use the traditional software to create a 3D modeling, create 3D models, such as AutoCAD or Blender. And also in the free response questions, we kind of ask them like what kind of education background they have and how old he is. The reason why we have this sort of background checking question is like we try to have our participants have like diverse background to make our result more diverse. So and it's also useful data for our data for the user study. So at the same time, we ask them, instead of just ask them a yes or no question, we actually ask going deeper. Like for example, we ask them instead of ask them if they think our system is easy to use, we ask them why our system is easy to use. Therefore, we can get some deeper opinion about how they think our system. So yeah, so now let's talk about the questionnaire result. So as we can see, most of our participants are ECE/CS major students. So this is something we want to prove in the future. Maybe next time we can recruit more people from like art major, like education or geography, or maybe like art. Because like compared to science engineer major students, those art major students, they may not have experience in 3D modeling. So their opinions would be more valuable for us when we do our user study, because if they think our system is easier than the other software, then they actually see that we can actually apply our software to people with different backgrounds. And also, another thing we find out is that most of our participants agree that our 3D modeling software is easier than other software, and they are all satisfied with the object they created.
All right, for the conclusions, as you can see in the comparison, our user interface is more neat compared to the conventional ones, and it's more intuitive and easier to learn because it's simpler and more intuitive interaction. However, we still have less functionalities and less features than the original ones. So for future improvements, we are thinking about changing the resizing with only one hand to resizing the object with two hands, because in the user study, some of the users are having difficulties resizing it. We're also introducing the undo and redo functionality, so users can to make changes to the objects and to their design easily. We are also introducing moving the shape along the axis. So, in the conventional 3D modeling apps, the users can use the keyboard and the mouse to move the object along only one axis. However, in the VR world, it's kind of difficult because you have 6 degrees of freedom, and it's kind of hard to control your hands to move only along one axis. So we are thinking about using the left hand to lock the axis, and then the users can rotate or move the object along only one axis. Next, we are thinking about adding multiple selection and combining multiple game objects so that the users can resize or change the texture of multiple game objects at the same time. Lastly, we would like to export the model for 3D modeling so that the users can actually export their model design in the VR world and print it out in the real world. All right, that's pretty much of it. Thank you guys for listening.